All right, so today we're going to be like untangling this knotty mess of ideas.
Yeah.
Nationalism, pacifism, cosmopolitanism.
Big words.
Big words, right?
Absolutely.
And we're using excerpts from this academic paper that connects these ideas in some really unexpected ways.
Yeah.
And even brings in George Orwell.
Oh, wow.
Which I bet you didn't see that coming.
I did not.
Yeah, and that's just the beginning.
Okay.
Like, get ready to have your mind blown.
All right.
By the end of this, you might start to question if your stance on certain global issues is actually rooted in something Orwell calls transferred nationalism.
That's a new one.
I know, right? Intriguing.
Yeah, very.
Okay, let's jump in.
Let's do it.
So it's kind of crazy, right, how easy it is to fall into these thought patterns
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
without even realizing it.
Like, we have these lenses, and we don't even know that we're looking.
We're looking through them.
Through them, exactly.
Yeah, and speaking of lenses, let's start with Orwell's perspective. His 1945 essay, Notes on Nationalism, offers some, like, surprisingly relevant insights, even today.
You think so?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
He didn't just talk about nationalism, he, like, dissected it,
Right.
you know, separating it from patriotism
Interesting.
in a way that, like, really makes you think.
Okay.
So what do you think? What's the difference?
Well, to Orwell, patriotism was more about a love for your country and way of life,
Yeah.
but without trying to force it on others.
Okay.
Nationalism, though, is like a whole other thing.
Yeah.
He saw it as this ideology that thrives on, you know, the belief that your nation is better than others,
Okay.
and you constantly pursue its interests above everything else.
So it's like us versus them.
Exactly. It's that taken to a whole new level.
Okay, so we've got nationalism laid out,
Yep.
and it's not pretty.
Not really.
But how does this connect to us today?
Well, think about this.
Okay.
Orwell identified this this really interesting type of nationalism.
Okay.
He called it transferred nationalism.
Right.
And it's this idea that people who feel disconnected from their own country or culture might latch on to another nation or group and, like, project their nationalist feelings onto them.
It's almost like they're searching for that sense of belonging.
Yes, exactly.
In a place where they don't really feel rooted.
Yeah.
So someone who's, like, disillusioned with their own country's politics might develop this, like, almost fanatical devotion to another country
Right.
they see as more idealistic.
Yeah, like they transfer those feelings.
That's a really interesting concept.
It is.
And I can see how it could apply to so many situations.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And here's where Orwell throws us a curveball.
Okay.
He suggests that even pacifism,
What?
yeah,
Pacifism.
in some forms can be a manifestation of this transferred nationalism.
No way.
Yeah.
Pacifism, the ideology of peace.
I know, mind-blowing, right?
Yeah.
So think about it.
Okay.
Orwell was observing some pacifists during World War II, and they weren't really opposed to violence in principle.
Okay.
They just objected to violence when it was used by the West.
So their pacifism.
Was selectively applied.
Wow.
Yeah. And he even wrote, quote,
Okay.
all in all, it is difficult not to feel that pacifism, as it appears among a section of the intelligentsia, is secretly inspired by an admiration for power and successful cruelty.
That's a bold statement.
It is,
Yeah.
right? It makes you reevaluate some assumptions.
It really does.
So that's definitely a new way to think about pacifism.
Yeah.
It challenges us to look beyond the surface
Right?
and consider the motivations behind people's actions and beliefs.
Absolutely.
And speaking of challenging assumptions,
Okay.
we've got another intellectual heavyweight coming up.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Gurn Adamson.
Okay.
And he takes a similar approach,
Okay.
but to multiculturalism.
Interesting.
Yeah, so Adamson builds on these ideas in his books.
Okay.
A Trojan Horse
Mm-hmm.
and Masochistic Nationalism.
Masochistic nationalism.
Yeah,
Okay. It's an intrigue.
where he dives deep into this concept
Okay.
called masochistic nationalism.
All right. That sounds intense.
It is, but it might resonate with you more than you think.
Okay.
So Adamson argues that it's particularly prevalent among some segments of the left who are so critical of their own culture and history
Okay.
that they end up idealizing other cultures,
Right?
sometimes to the point of self-deprecation.
Interesting.
And this resonates with Orwell's transferred nationalism.
I see the connection.
Yeah, they're seeking validation and belonging outside of their own national identity.
Okay.
So it's like they're transferring their feelings of national pride,
Yeah.
or in this case, guilt and shame,
Right.
onto another group,
Okay.
almost like a form of self-punishment.
You got it.
And Adamson specifically critiques certain diversity initiatives,
Oh, really?
in universities,
Interesting.
arguing that they can actually backfire. So instead of fostering, like, genuine understanding
Right.
and equality,
Yeah.
he suggests they can end up undermining individual merit and reinforce the very divisions they aim to bridge.
That's a good point.
And he even states that
Let's hear it.
multiculturalism is a conservative idea,
Oh, wow.
which is seen as progressive.
That's really flipping the script.
Right. It makes
Yeah.
you wonder if we're sometimes promoting division
Hmm.
in the name of diversity.
Interesting.
Yeah. And this critique is also echoed by Keenan Malik
Okay.
in his book Multiculturalism and Its Discontents,
Mm-hmm.
where he argues that both the left and the right
Okay.
often oversimplify cultures,
Right.
treating them as these, like, homogenous entities.
Yeah, I can see that.
And the simplification leads to a dangerous clash of civilizations mentality.
That's a scary thought.
It is, right?
Yeah.
So we've explored the complexities of nationalism
Yeah.
and the potential pitfalls of multiculturalism.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like both ideologies have their downsides.
For sure.
So where do we go from here?
That's the big question.
Is there another way to approach these issues?
Well, that's where the concept of cosmopolitanism comes into play,
Okay.
and it might just offer a path forward.
All right, let's hear it.
Cosmopolitanism.
It sounds almost utopian.
It does, right?
Yeah, like something out of a sci-fi novel.
I know.
But what does it actually mean in a practical sense?
Well, think of it this way.
Okay.
Cosmopolitanism is about acknowledging our shared humanity.
Mm-hmm.
It's about seeing ourselves as citizens of the world,
Okay.
not just bound by national borders.
So instead of us versus them,
Right.
it's more like we're all in this together.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, and it's not just a philosophical ideal either.
Really?
Yeah, the source material actually highlights a real-world example.
Okay, what is it?
The European Union.
The EU?
Yeah.
Okay.
The EU, despite its imperfections,
Right.
demonstrates how nations with a long history of conflict can come together for mutual benefit. It's a model that offers a glimpse into what a more cosmopolitan world could look like.
The EU is a fascinating example.
It is.
To think that countries that were once at war with each other
I know.
are now collaborating on everything from trade to environmental policy.
It's pretty remarkable.
It is.
It shows that it is possible to move beyond those old rivalries and find common ground.
It's pretty encouraging.
Yeah.
But what about those who are skeptical of cosmopolitanism?
Oh, yeah.
The source material mentions some critics who argue that it undermines national sovereignty
Yeah.
and is difficult to implement in a world driven by self-interest.
Right. Those are valid concerns.
Yeah.
It's important to acknowledge the complexities and the challenges it faces.
Okay.
But think about the challenges we're facing in the 21st century.
But
Climate change, pandemics, global economic instability.
yeah,
These are all transnational issues
right.
that require international cooperation.
It's like the world is becoming more interconnected. And these global challenges are forcing us to recognize our interdependence.
Yeah, and our source material gives some specific examples of this.
Okay, like what?
Well, it links the impact of drought to the Syrian civil war,
Oh, wow.
highlighting how climate change can exacerbate these existing tensions.
Yeah.
And it also mentions the potential for a Middle Eastern economic community focused on water and energy resources,
Okay.
demonstrating how shared challenges can drive cooperation.
It sounds like we're at a crossroads.
We are.
Our old ways of thinking,
Right.
based on national borders and self-interest,
Yeah,
aren't really equipped to handle these global challenges.
they are.
We need a new paradigm,
We do.
and cosmopolitanism might offer a way forward.
It might.
But how do we actually get there?
Yeah, how do we translate this ideal
Yeah.
into tangible solutions?
That's the key question.
Is.
And perhaps surprisingly,
Okay.
the answer might lie in an idea that often gets associated with nationalism,
Okay.
federalism.
Wait, federalism.
Yeah.
I thought that was all about dividing power between a central authority and individual states.
Right.
How does that fit with a cosmopolitan vision of global citizenship?
It's about finding the right balance.
Okay.
Remember how we talked about the EU
Yeah.
as an example of cosmopolitanism in action?
Right.
Well, the EU is actually built on a federalist structure.
Oh, that's right.
So member states retain their sovereignty,
Mm-hmm.
but they also cede some power
Okay.
to a central authority
Yeah.
for the sake of these common goals.
Interesting.
And remember, George Orwell himself
Oh, yeah.
supported the idea of a European federation. He believed that federalism could reconcile national identity with a broader sense of global citizenship.
So Orwell, the same guy who warned us about the dangers of nationalism, also saw the potential of federalism to bridge those divides.
Exactly.
Right.
He understood that people crave a sense of belonging and identity,
Yeah.
but he also believed that this didn't have to come at the expense of cooperation. Solidarity.
With others beyond their own nation.
Yes.
Okay, so federalism could be a way to blend local and global identities, allowing for a sense of belonging on both levels.
Exactly.
But hasn't the EU also faced its share of challenges?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
What can we learn from its successes and failures as we explore this idea of federalism on a larger scale?
Well, you're right. The EU has faced its share of hurdles.
It has.
Economic crises, political disagreements, the rise of populist movements. But it's also demonstrated resilience and adaptability.
Okay.
Proving that it's possible to create structures that balance unity and diversity.
Right.
National interests and shared goals.
So it's a work in progress.
It is.
A constant process of negotiation and adaptation.
Yeah, finding that sweet spot between central authority and individual autonomy is key.
Yeah, and that's where things get even more interesting. Because it touches upon how we define our identities in an increasingly interconnected world.
So if we move towards a more cosmopolitan future, what happens to our sense of national identity?
That's a big question.
It is, right?
Yeah.
Does it fade away, or can it coexist with a broader sense of global citizenship?
I think a lot of people worry about that.
They do.
Yeah, the idea of giving up national identity can be kind of scary.
Yeah, it's tied to so much culture history, sense of belonging.
Exactly.
I get that fear.
Yeah.
But cosmopolitanism isn't about erasing national identities.
No, it's not.
It's about recognizing that our identities are multi-layered.
They are.
We can be proud of our national heritage while also embracing our common humanity and our connection to others around the world.
Exactly.
It's not an either situation.
No.
It's about embracing both.
I like that.
So it's like having multiple layers of identity.
Okay.
You can be a citizen of your country, a member of your local community, and a citizen of the world.
Yeah.
All at the same time.
All at the same time, exactly.
It's about finding ways to bridge those identities.
Yeah.
To build a sense of belonging that transcends national borders without erasing the unique aspects of our individual cultures and histories.
That's the key.
It all circles back to those core concepts we've been discussing.
Yeah.
Nationalism, pacifism, and cosmopolitanism.
Right.
We're searching for a way to evolve beyond nationalism's limitations and its inherent potential for division and conflict.
Yeah.
But we also recognize that a sense of identity and belonging is crucial.
It is.
It seems like finding that balance is the key.
Balance is everything.
And that's where cosmopolitanism, combined with these practical models like federalism, offers a potential path forward.
It does.
It's about recognizing our shared humanity.
Yes.
And working together to address the challenges we face as a global community.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
It sounds like we're talking about a pretty radical shift in perspective, though.
It is a big shift.
I mean, for centuries, the nation-state has been the dominant form of political organization.
Right.
To move beyond that requires a whole new way of thinking about ourselves.
It does.
And our place in the world.
It's a big ask.
It is.
But I believe it's necessary
Yeah.
if we want to create a more peaceful and sustainable future. The challenges we face, from climate change to global inequality, to the rise of new technologies, demand a level of cooperation and solidarity that transcends national boundaries.
So how do we even begin to make this shift?
That's the question, isn't it?
Where do we start?
Well, I think it starts with education and dialogue. It starts with challenging our own assumptions and being willing to engage with different perspectives. It starts with recognizing that the world is far more complex than any single ideology or worldview can capture.
It starts with each of us.
It does.
And maybe it also starts with looking for those practical examples, like the European Union, where different nations have managed to come together and build something greater than themselves.
Absolutely. We need those models of success.
I do.
Those glimpses of what's possible when we move beyond the limitations of narrow national interests and embrace a more cosmopolitan vision
This has been an incredibly insightful discussion.
It has.
We've covered so much ground,
We have.
from Orwell's critique of nationalism to Adamson's analysis of multiculturalism to the potential of cosmopolitanism as a framework for a more just and sustainable world.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is.
But it's all connected.
It is. And what I find so fascinating is how these seemingly abstract ideas have very real implications for how we understand ourselves, our relationships with others, and the challenges we face as a global community. And it all comes back to that initial question we posed.
What was that?
Have you ever considered that your stance on certain global issues might be influenced by a form of transferred nationalism?
Ooh, that's a good one.
It is, Rhett.
Yeah.
It's a question that invites us to examine our own biases and motivations, to dig deeper into the complexities of these issues.
For sure.
I know I'm definitely going to be thinking about that question for a long time to come.
Me too.
So where do we go from here?
Good question.
What's the next step in this exploration of nationalism, pacifism, and cosmopolitanism?
Well, I think the next step is to look beyond the theoretical frameworks you've discussed and delve into the real-world implications of these ideas.
Right. So like less theory, more practice.
Exactly.
Okay. I like it.
We've talked about the European Union as a potential model for cosmopolitanism in action.
We have.
But what about other examples?
Yeah, that's a great point.
What about international organizations like the United Nations? Or global movements like the fight against climate change? Are these examples of cosmopolitanism in practice?
They certainly have elements of cosmopolitanism.
They do.
But they also face significant challenges.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
The United Nations, for example,
Yep.
is often hampered by the competing interests of its member states.
Right.
And the climate change movement, while increasingly global in scope,
Yeah,
still struggles to translate awareness into concrete action.
that's true.
So if these examples are imperfect, what does that tell us about the feasibility of cosmopolitanism as a guiding principle for global governance?
Well, I think it tells us that cosmopolitanism isn't a utopian ideal, but a work in progress. It's a process, not a destination.
So we're not talking about some kind of overnight transformation, but rather a gradual shift in consciousness and a willingness to experiment with new ways of organizing ourselves and relating to each other. It's a shift that requires us to engage with some complex questions about identity, belonging, and our responsibilities to each other as citizens of a shared world.
Those are the big ones.
They are.
Yeah. And that's where the real work begins.
And it's work that requires all of us to participate.
It does.
We can't just leave it to the experts or politicians.
We can't.
We each have a role to play in shaping a more cosmopolitan future.
We do.
Absolutely. It starts with each of us expanding our understanding of the world, challenging our own biases, and engaging in constructive dialogue with those who hold different perspectives.
Exactly.
It starts with recognizing that we're all part of a larger human story.
We are.
And that our fates are intertwined.
I love that.
This has been an incredible conversation.
It has been.
We've explored the complex and often contradictory ideas of nationalism, pacifism, and cosmopolitanism.
Yeah.
We've delved into the historical roots of these concepts and examined their contemporary relevance. And we've considered the potential of cosmopolitanism as a framework for addressing the challenges of a globalized world.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
But we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
There's so much more to explore.
There is.
So many more questions to ask.
And that's what makes this such a fascinating topic.
It is.
It's a journey of discovery.
Yeah.
A constant process of learning and unlearning.
I like that.
So where do we go from here?
Another good question.
What's the next step in this deep dive into the world of nationalism, pacifism, and cosmopolitanism?
I think the next step is to move beyond the abstract. And explore some concrete examples of how these ideas are playing out in the real world.
All right, so less theory, more application.
Exactly.
I like it.
We've talked about the European Union as a potential model for cosmopolitan governance.
Yeah.
But what about other examples?
That's a great idea. What about global movements like the fight for human rights or the push for sustainable development? Are these expressions of a cosmopolitan ethos?
They certainly have elements of cosmopolitanism,
Yeah.
but they also face challenges.
Oh, of course.
The human rights movement, for example, often struggles to hold powerful actors accountable.
Yeah, the big one.
And the sustainable development movement faces the daunting task of balancing economic growth
Right.
with environmental protection.
It's a tough one.
It is.
So it's not about romanticizing these movements or pretending that they're perfect examples of cosmopolitanism in action.
Right.
It's about understanding their complexities, their successes, and their limitations.
You got it.
And it's about learning from these examples as we continue to grapple with the challenges of building a more just and sustainable world.
Absolutely.
So it's about moving beyond the theoretical and engaging with the messy realities of global politics and social change.
That's where the real work is.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener.
It has been.
I feel like we've gone from questioning our own assumptions about nationalism and pacifism
Right.
to exploring the potential of cosmopolitanism as a framework for a more just and interconnected world.
It's been quite a journey.
And what's important to remember is that this is an ongoing conversation.
It is.
There are no easy answers, no quick fixes.
Nope.
It's about continually engaging with these ideas, challenging ourselves, and working together to create a better future.
I couldn't agree more.
And speaking of a better future, I think it's time to wrap up this part of our deep dive
Okay.
and leave our listeners with a final, thought-provoking question to ponder.
I like where you're going with this.
Okay.
So here's a question for you to consider.
All right.
If, as we've discussed, climate change is forcing us to think more cosmopolitically, to see ourselves as part of a global community facing a shared threat,
Okay.
what are the implications for our current political and economic systems?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Are these systems equipped to handle a challenge of this magnitude? Or do we need to fundamentally rethink how we organize ourselves as a global society?
It makes you wonder if the systems we've built, with their emphasis on national sovereignty and competition, are really capable of tackling a challenge as big and complex as climate change.
It's a valid point.
It is.
Climate change requires long-term thinking and global cooperation, which seem to clash with our current systems that often prioritize short-term gains and national self-interest.
It's almost as if we're wired for immediate gratification. While climate change demands a level of foresight and collective action that we haven't quite grasped yet.
It's like we're trying to put out a forest fire with a garden hose.
Exactly.
The tools just aren't up to the task.
So are you suggesting we need to completely rethink
We might have to.
our political and economic models?
It's a possibility.
That seems like a pretty radical proposition.
Radical. Perhaps, but I'd argue that the truly radical approach is clinging to outdated systems that are leading us down a path of ecological and social destruction. We need to be bold in our thinking, willing to consider new models of governance and economic organization that prioritize sustainability and global well-being.
So instead of clinging to the familiar, we need to be open to new ideas,
Yes.
new ways of doing things.
New ways of thinking.
What are some alternative systems that we could explore?
Well, there are many possibilities.
Okay.
Some advocate for strengthening existing international institutions, giving them more power to enforce global agreements on climate change and other pressing issues. Others propose creating entirely new forms of global governance based on principles of sustainability and equity,
Interesting.
ensuring that the needs of both present and future generations are met.
One idea that I find intriguing is the concept of Earth trusteeship.
Earth trusteeship.
Yeah.
I like that.
It's this idea that we're not just inhabitants of the planet, but caretakers. Responsible for its well-being for current and future generations.
Right.
It shifts the perspective away from individual nation states towards a collective responsibility for our shared planetary home.
That's a powerful concept.
It is. And it aligns beautifully with the cosmopolitan ideal we've been discussing. It does.
Yeah, it's about expanding the notion of citizenship beyond national borders, recognizing that we're all interconnected and that our actions have consequences that ripple across the globe.
It's like that saying.
What's that?
We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children.
I love that quote.
That's a good one, right? Earth trusteeship takes that idea and applies it on a global scale. It's about acting as responsible stewards of the planet. Not just for ourselves, but for all of humanity.
Right.
And the web of life that sustains us.
It goes beyond just feel-good sentimentality. Host speaker.
Yeah, it goes beyond just feel-good sentimentality.
It does.
It's a matter of recognizing that our own well-being, our very survival,
Right.
depends on the health of the planet
Yeah.
and the well-being of all people.
We're all part of this,
Yeah,
complex, interconnected system.
totally.
What impacts one part of the system
Yeah.
ultimately impacts us all.
It brings us back to that, fundamental question we've been wrestling with.
Uh-huh.
If the traditional power structures
Right.
of nation-states are becoming less relevant
Okay.
in a globalized world,
Yeah.
what will take their place?
That's the question, isn't it?
What new forms of identity and belonging will emerge, and how will they shape the future?
It's the question that keeps coming back to us.
It does.
And for good reason.
Yeah.
As old structures crumble,
Right.
what new foundations will we build upon? Will it be chaos and conflict, a scramble for resources and power?
Yeah.
Or will we rise to the occasion,
Right.
forging a new sense of global community? One based on shared values, empathy, and a commitment to our common future.
I know which future I'd rather see.
Me too.
But how do we make that vision a reality?
It's a big question.
How do we navigate this transition from a world dominated by nation states
Right.
to a more interconnected cosmopolitan world?
I believe the answer lies in recognizing our potential.
Okay.
We have the capacity for incredible things, for compassion, creativity, and collaboration
Yeah.
on a scale never seen before.
We have the tools
We do.
and the knowledge to solve the challenges we face.
Yeah.
What we need is the will and the vision to act.
It sounds like a daunting task,
It does.
but also an incredibly exciting one.
It is.
It's about rewriting the script,
Yeah.
challenging the old narratives of division and competition,
Okay.
and embracing a new story of interconnectedness
Yeah.
and shared destiny.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
what's the takeaway for our listeners?
That's a good question.
What can they do
Yeah.
to be a part of this global transformation?
Don't let the enormity of the challenge paralyze you.
Right.
Change starts with each of us.
Okay.
Start by educating yourself.
Right.
Read widely, engage in thoughtful conversations, and challenge your own assumptions.
Okay.
Connect with others who share your values
Right.
and work together to make a difference in your communities.
Yeah.
Support organizations and initiatives that are working to build a more just and sustainable world.
I like it.
Never underestimate the power of your individual actions.
It sounds like you're saying that even small acts
Yeah.
of courage, compassion, and awareness can contribute to a larger ripple effect.
They can.
It's about taking those first steps,
It is.
however small they may seem,
Yeah.
and trusting that they will lead to something bigger,
Right.
something transformative.
The challenges we face are immense,
Yeah.
but so is our potential.
Okay.
If we act with wisdom, courage, and a deep sense of interconnectedness, we can create a world where all people
Yeah.
and all living beings can thrive.
This deep dive has been a whirlwind of ideas,
Yeah.
a journey from the shadows of nationalism
Yeah.
to the hopeful horizon of cosmopolitanism.
I like that.
We've wrestled with complex questions, challenged our own assumptions,
Right.
and explored the potential for a more just and sustainable future.
It's been quite a ride.
And it's clear that this conversation doesn't end here.
It doesn't.
It's an ongoing process of exploration, dialogue, and action.
You've captured it perfectly.
So where do we go from here?
Well,
What's the next step in this deep dive into the world of nationalism, pacifism, and cosmopolitanism?
I think the next step is to move beyond the abstract
Okay.
and explore some concrete examples of how these ideas are playing out in the real world.
Right. So less theory, more application.
Exactly.
I like it.
We've talked about the European Union as a potential model for cosmopolitan governance.
Yeah.
But what about other examples?
That's a great idea. What about global movements like the fight for human rights
Okay.
or the push for sustainable development? Are these expressions of a cosmopolitan ethos?
Yeah, they certainly have elements of cosmopolitanism,
They do.
but they also face challenges.
Oh, of course.
The human rights movement, for example,
Yeah.
often struggles to hold powerful actors accountable.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And the sustainable development movement faces the daunting task of balancing economic growth
Right.
with environmental protection.
It's a tough one.
It is.
So it's not about romanticizing these movements
No.
or pretending that they're perfect examples of cosmopolitanism in action.
Right.
It's about understanding their complexities, their successes and their limitations.
You got it.
And it's about learning from these examples as we continue to grapple with the challenges of building a more just and sustainable world.
Absolutely.
So it's about moving beyond the theoretical and engaging with the messy realities of global politics and social change.
That's where the real work is.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener.
It has been.
I feel like we've gone from questioning our own assumptions about nationalism and pacifism
Right.
to exploring the potential of cosmopolitanism
Yeah.
as a framework for a more just and interconnected world.
It's been quite a journey.
And what's important to remember is that this is an ongoing conversation.
It is.
There are no easy answers, no quick fixes.
Nope.
It's about continually engaging with these ideas, challenging ourselves and working together to create a better future.
I couldn't agree more.
And speaking of a better future, I think it's time to wrap up this part of our deep dives
Okay.
and leave our listeners with a final thought-provoking question to ponder.
I like where you're going with this.
Okay.
So here's a question for you to consider.
Right.
If, as we've discussed, climate change is forcing us to think more cosmopolitically, to see ourselves as part of a global community facing a shared threat,
Okay.
what are the implications for our current political and economic systems?
Oh, that's a good one.
Are these systems equipped to handle a challenge of this magnitude? Or do we need to fundamentally rethink how we organize ourselves as a global society?
That's something I hope you'll continue to explore long after this deep dive is over.
Me too.
And to our listeners, we encourage you to join us in this ongoing exploration.
Yes.
Read the works of Orwell, Adamson, and the other thinkers we've mentioned.
Definitely.
Challenge your own assumptions. Engage in thoughtful discussions with others.
It's important.
The future of our planet may depend on it.
It might.
Yeah, it's a matter of recognizing that our own well-being, our very survival, depends on the health of the planet and the well-being of all people.
Right, like we're all part of this complex, interconnected system. What impacts one part of the system ultimately impacts us all.
Totally. And it brings us back to that fundamental question we've been wrestling with. You know, if the traditional power structures of nation-states are becoming less relevant in a globalized world, what will take their place?
Yeah, that's the big question. What new forms of identity and belonging will emerge, and how will they shape the future?
It's the question that keeps coming back to us. And for good reason, as old structures crumble, what new foundations will we build upon?
Right, will it be chaos and conflict, a scramble for resources and power?
Or will we rise to the occasion and forge a new sense of global community, one based on shared values, empathy, and a commitment to our common future?
It's a choice, isn't it?
It is. I know which future I'd rather see.
Me too. But how do we make that vision a reality?
Yeah, how do we navigate this transition from a world dominated by nation-states to a more interconnected cosmopolitan world?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing our potential. Like, we have the capacity for incredible things.
Okay.
For compassion, creativity, and collaboration on a scale never seen before.
It's true. We have the tools and the knowledge to solve the challenges we face.
We do. What we need is the will and the vision to act.
It sounds like a daunting task,
It can feel that way.
but also an incredibly exciting one.
It is. It's about rewriting the script, you know?
Yeah.
Challenging those old narratives of division and competition
Right.
and embracing a new story, one of interconnectedness and shared destiny.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what's the takeaway for our listeners? What can they do to be a part of this global transformation?
Don't let the enormity of the challenge paralyze you. Change starts with each of us.
Okay, where do we start?
Start by educating yourself. Read widely, engage in thoughtful conversations, and challenge your own assumptions. Connect with others who share your values and work together to make a difference in your communities.
Okay.
Support organizations and initiatives that are working to build a more just and sustainable world. Never underestimate the power of your individual actions.
So you're saying that even small acts of courage, compassion, and awareness can contribute to a larger ripple effect.
Exactly. It's about taking those first steps, however small they may seem, and trusting that they will lead to something bigger, something transformative.
The challenges we face are immense.
They are, but so is our potential.
If we act with wisdom, courage, and a deep sense of interconnectedness,
Yes.
we can create a world where all people and all living beings can thrive.
That's the goal, isn't it?
It is.
Huh?
This deep dive has been a whirlwind of ideas, a journey from the shadows of nationalism to the hopeful horizon of cosmopolitanism.
I like that.
We've wrestled with complex questions, challenged our own assumptions, and explored the potential for a more just and sustainable future.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have, and it's clear that this conversation doesn't end here.
It doesn't. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah, of exploration, dialogue, and action.
You said it.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it has inspired you to continue exploring these critical issues and to be a part of creating a world where everyone can flourish. Until next time, keep diving deep.